At some point in this journey, many of us reach a quiet realization. We don't just wrestle with where God might be leading us, we wrestle with what's holding us back. And often the barriers aren't dramatic, they're not loud or obvious. They can be very subtle, reasonable, sometimes even spiritual sounding, which is why they're so powerful. When we talk about going in God's mission, whether that means across the street or across the world, most people don't say, "I don't care." Instead, we say things like, "I'm not ready yet." Or we say things like, "This isn't the right season," or "I have responsibilities," or "Someone else is more qualified." And those statements may sound wise on the surface, but underneath them, there's often something deeper at work. Here's the central idea of this chapter. Barriers to going are rarely about logistics alone. They're often about trust. God does not dismiss our concerns, but He does invite us to examine them, honestly. One of the most common barriers is fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of loss, fear of inadequacy. Another barrier, comfort. We grow accustomed to rhythms that feel safe, predictable, and manageable. And sometimes the most subtle barrier of all is timing. We convince ourselves that obedience will make more sense later, when life feels more stable or more spacious or more certain. But Scripture reminds us that obedience often comes before clarity. Throughout the Bible, God's people regularly raise legitimate concerns when He invites them to move. They ask good questions. They name real risks. And yet again and again, God responds not by removing every obstacle, but by reminding them of His presence. "I will be with you," He says. That promise is repeated far more often than detailed explanations. It's important to say this clearly. Acknowledging barriers is not the same as being unfaithful. God invites honesty. He welcomes questions. He meets us in our weakness. But He also invites us to examine whether our barriers are becoming excuses that keep us from trusting Him. This chapter is not meant to guilt you into action. It's meant to help you name what's real without letting fear make your decisions for you. God's invitations are always rooted in grace, not pressure. And He's patient with those who bring their hesitations to Him openly. As you read this chapter, take time to identify your barriers. Not to judge them, not to minimize them, but to name them honestly before God. Ask yourself, what am I afraid of losing? What feels most costly? What would it look like to trust God with this? These questions are not meant to push you, they're meant to be open space for God to speak. If you're processing this chapter in a group, this is a place for grace. Barriers often surface best in safe, honest community. Listen more than you speak. Resist the urge to fix or advise. Trust that God uses shared vulnerability to bring clarity. Let me offer this encouragement. God is not surprised by your hesitations. He's not intimidated by your fears. And He's not waiting for you to become fearless before He works. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's the trust in the presence of fear. As you move into chapter 5, my prayer is that you would experience freedom, not pressure. That you would allow God to gently surface the barriers that matter most. And that in time, you would discover that the God who calls His people to go is also the God who walks with them every step of the way. Bring your barriers into the light. Trust God with what feels costly and take the next step. Not because it's easy, but because He is faithful.